Are you looking for a deep dive on this year's crop of rookie QBs? Do you want to get ahead of your league mates understanding which quarterbacks to target in this year's rookie drafts? Stick around as we dive into the strengths, weaknesses, and the fantasy outlooks of the big six quarterbacks of this year's draft class. We're talking JJ McCarthy, out of Michigan, one of the youngest quarterbacks in the draft, only 21 years old. Prototypical height, I am not convinced about the frame. He weighed in at the combine north of 210.
Yeah.
I think he's probably going to settle in around 200 pounds. The biggest, I guess, question mark we have about JJ McCarthy is he wasn't really asked to do much in the Michigan offense over the last 2 years because the offense was so good, because that offensive line and the running game was phenomenal. Do you think JJ McCarthy is going to be able to step into the NFL and potentially be that franchise quarterback from day one?
No. I'm not a JJ McCarthy guy either. I mean, I think there's room for growth there. The thing that I'm struggling with a little bit is some of the names that I hear him compared to, and obviously what he was asked to do in Michigan's offense was, play within structure, great, manage the offense, take your shots when you need to, all that kind of thing. And I hear a little bit of, Kirk Cousins and maybe Drew Brees and maybe even Brock Purdy, I've heard a couple of times, that kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, none of those guys were round one QBs. I mean, the idea of him being a top 10 quarterback to me is insane because the whole benefit of the Shanahan system, and I hear him linked with those, and I can see that. I can see he could do quite well in those kind of systems. But the idea is that you're not paying premium money for a QB. You're picking one up later. I mean, he has some strengths. He's athletic and obviously had some insane numbers at the combine, and he's a fundamentally sound prospect. Like his tape was clean. Like, he had good footwork, he had good accuracy. I thought he was willing to try and fit the ball into some tight windows. At times, perhaps he shouldn't have, but he was willing to take those on. He wasn't scared. I was like with you when I was watching the film. I was like, this guy looks skinny and kind of a bit small, and then suddenly it's like, oh, 6'3", 220, and you're like, okay,
it's a lot of water.
My eyes must be because so I don't know how real that is, but obviously if he is 6'3", 220, he's not small and he's not skinny. But yeah, I thought there is arm talent there, but I thought watching it looked to me like when he was throwing the ball, he had to really throw the ball, if that makes sense. So when he was throwing a 10-yard in-breaker or something, it looked to me like he was really having to step in and really having to get his body through the throw, which he was playing behind that Michigan offensive line with that running attack, and it bought him a lot of time. And I can see how, so he was playing a lot from a clean pocket. He was able to step into his throws and be able to do that. I would be concerned about, I don't think he's going to necessarily have that talent advantage in those areas in the NFL. How good is he at throwing off platform? How good is he when he's having to just rely on getting the ball out with his arm, which, if it's like we said, if he can sit there in the pocket and go 1, 2, 3, I think he can do that. But it looked to me like he had to put a lot in to get the ball out there. I saw some looking off, which we were talking about, and I think he was a good processor. I think you could see it where, again, he had the benefit of time and probably more of a pro-style offense than any of these guys. In fact, I think he was the only guy that I saw take any snaps under center that I saw. I'm not saying they didn't, but yeah. And I thought he could go through his progressions. But like I said, to me, he's one of those guys where, like, I know they're not that far outside the top 10. But if you're talking about him going to someone like the Vikings, I could kind of see that. And I could kind of think, okay, you've got two, one obviously elite receiver, one very promising prospect at receiver, tight end, 2 good tackles. He's got to come in and just run the system. I think that's a great fit. If he ends up there, I think that would be great. If he ended up at the Raiders, the Falcons, the Broncos, where you are going to be asked to do more, aren't you? You're going to be asked to do more for all those teams because there isn't the talent around it like it is at the Vikings. I would worry because I don't know. He hasn't ever been asked to do that, and you compare it to someone like Drake May, where I've been critical of him, but to be fair, he was everything to that team. JJ McCarthy wasn't asked to do loads, was he? So that would be my worries on him. But I think there's talent there. I could see him working in situations, but I don't think he's a guy that can work in every situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I've described him as my Rorschach test this year because I think whatever you're looking at is and want to see, you will see. I think there is arm talent there. I think there is talent there. I think he's a good athlete. I think he can make all the throws. I think, he can operate an offense. But there are times when he struggles to throw with anticipation and he needs to see it open before he releases the ball. I think it was really interesting the point you made about the kind of arm talent. I don't think he's an arm thrower, he's a body thrower. And I think that, we talked about with Drake May, him having poor footwork. And I think part of that, he can kind of get away with it at times because he's a natural arm thrower and he's got the arm strength and the arm talent that he can almost get away with subpar footwork. It affects his accuracy, but he can, whereas JJ McCarthy can't. And I think you can view that one or two ways. You can say he's got good footwork and therefore he regularly sets his feet and throws off a good platform and it leads to having, good end results. Or you could also say he needs a good platform to be able to throw. So if he's, having to move around the pocket, having to, avoid the rush and throw off a challenging base or adjust his arm angles, he might struggle. And I don't know the answer whether you could say that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think you could basically spin it either way. I think that, I think it was Nate Tice who said this perfectly in terms of JJ McCarthy. He's a second round quarterback, but he's a quarterback, so that's top 20 pick. This year we're particularly desperate for quarterbacks, so that makes him a top 10 pick. And all it takes is one team to particularly like him, and then suddenly he's a top 5 pick. And I think that's the way that JJ McCarthy's going. Yeah, in an ideal world, you would sit back and take him in the second rounds, and you could potentially then sit him for a year and allow him to develop and maybe build out that frame and maybe work on some of that processing. I think the processing there, but the anticipation I think is lacking slightly. And I think he'd be fantastic. But the problem is that if you're waiting until the second round, you're not getting him. And if you're taking him in the top 15, the top 10, wherever he ended up going, it's very difficult to keep those fans happy with him sat on the sidelines, isn't it? And therefore he's going to get played and he's probably going to get rushed and he's not going to have that time to develop. So yeah, I'm really excited about the potential, but I am very concerned that I think he is more reliant on who his play caller is going to be, what the surroundings are going to be, and how he is allowed to develop than potentially some of the other quarterbacks. So if, you threw out New England as a particularly bad landing spot, if for whatever reason JJ McCarthy ended up somewhere like that, where there's no receiving talent, there's no offensive line, it's a new play caller, but we don't really know how good he's going to be as a play caller. And it's like, in that situation, I'd be really concerned. If JJ McCarthy could end up in, Minnesota, where he's got all of that surrounding talent and that kind of incubator to kind of allow him to develop, I'd be a lot higher and a lot more excited. So yeah, it's kind of I don't really know what to make of him, shall we say, at this point.
I know you're always against the idea, your mantra, you should probably get a tattoo somewhere, of draft the talent, not don't worry about the landing spot so much.
We've got t-shirts now. If you want that on a t-shirt, we've got t-shirts made.
But I think with him, the landing spot, I do think for not necessarily all QBs, but for certain QBs, it's so important because I know it's a bit of a dirty word now, but I think he struck me as this guy could be an elite game manager. And I could see him be an incredibly productive NFL quarterback with good surrounding talent, and I think there's a role to do that. I think obviously we're talking about a guy who was drafted at the last pick of the 7th round with Brock Purdy, but that idea that actually there's still a place in the NFL for a guy who can go into an offense and have talent around him. There's a skill to getting the ball into those guys' hands at the right time and almost being like a vessel for the coach to try and control the game. If you've got an elite offensive play caller, elite offensive designer, and talent around you, and I could totally see him being a fantastic NFL QB if he lands in the right spot. If he goes to somewhere where he has, like you said, like the Patriots, or somewhere where he's expected to carry the load, I do genuinely worry it will crush him. I do. I think that I can't sit here and say, oh, it definitely will, but I would have my real concerns there. And I think draft day is just going to be so important for him. I do genuinely really hope. I think him and the Vikings would be such a good fit. Such a good fit.